She didn't drop the leash. She let go of it, on purpose, and the splash that followed changed everything. That was what Emma Caldwell would remind herself over and over in the days that followed. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. She had seen it clearly with her own eyes. It happened on an autumn afternoon. Emma was jogging as usual, earbuds in, her mind drifting between a to-do list and dinner plans. That's when she saw the woman, tall, elegant, radiating a beauty that couldn't be mistaken. Emma grew curious and slowed down. The woman was walking a pit bull. It was limping, clearly in pain. Then, without the slightest hesitation, she picked up the injured dog and threw it over the railing of the bridge. No scream, no remorse. Just cold, mechanical cruelty. Emma froze mid-stride. Her heart pounded, once, then twice, and then she ran toward the railing, a shout ripping from her chest. "Hey!" But the woman had already turned her back and walked away, her high heels clicking steadily, as if what she'd done wasn't worth a second thought. Emma didn't stop to think. She climbed the railing, eyes scanning the churning waters below. The dog, a brindled pit bull, about 6 or 7 years old, was flailing in panicked circles, one leg stretched out and motionless. Terror filled its eyes. "Hang on!" she shouted, and then jumped over the bridge rail without another thought. The river hit her like a wall, cold, violent. It yanked her body as she struggled to swim toward the flailing animal. Water flooded her ears, her mouth, her lungs. But she reached him, grabbed hold of the collar, and somehow the two of them made it to shore, both shivering, both exhausted, but alive. The dog collapsed beside her, letting out a weak whimper as she wrapped her arms around him. "You're safe now," she whispered. "I've got you." When they got home, she wrapped him in an old flannel blanket, laid him on the bathroom floor, then knelt beside him. His hind leg was swollen. Bruises ran along his side. There were old scars, too, long healed, but never gone. She gave him water. He drank it all, his tail tapping lightly on the tile. She checked for a collar. There was none, but there was a small lump beneath the skin at the nape of his neck, a chip. Emma didn't hesitate. She drove him to the nearest veterinary clinic, an old place on the outskirts. Dr. Lark, a stern but gentle woman in her 50s, scanned the chip. "He's registered," she said softly. "His name is Apollo. Owner is Charlotte Wallace." Emma blinked. "Charlotte Wallace? You mean billionaire Charlotte Wallace? The Glow Royale woman?" "That's her." Apollo, or rather this poor dog, belonged to a woman who had more cars than employees. A woman famous for charity galas, lavish spa openings, and smiling in every photo. Emma looked back at the dog, her throat tightening. Why would someone like her... She stopped. She already knew the answer. "I need to report this." Dr. Lark looked straight into her eyes. "Emma, be careful. That woman has more lawyers than morals. She's dangerous in ways that leave no fingerprints." That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She folded towels into a makeshift bed and placed Apollo, or, no, she decided to call him Miles, on the heating pad near the window. He looked up at her with dull, half-closed eyes, but full of trust. She should have called animal services. Let them handle it. She picked up her phone, hovered over the contact. But then Miles whimpered. He dragged himself forward, laid his head on her foot. That light pressure kept her still. She put the phone down. The next morning, she went jogging again. Same route, same familiar stretch of sidewalk. When she neared the bridge, her feet stopped, not from exhaustion, but from memory. And then she heard a voice. You saw it too, didn't you? An older man stood by the railing, thin, weathered face, cane in hand, eyes full of understanding. I was here yesterday, he said. Name's Larry, retired cop. I've been watching that woman for years. Emma didn't respond. Larry handed her a folded piece of paper, a name, an address. She's done worse than throwing a dog into the river, he said, voice gravelly. If you're going to ignore it, fine. But if not, start here. Emma looked down at the paper, then at the river. Sometimes, Larry said, justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it limps, but still finds its way. Emma nodded, quietly, but with resolve. She had seen too much to walk away now. Emma sat at her kitchen table, staring at the folded paper Larry had handed her. The name written in tight block letters was unfamiliar. Marcia Dent. Below it, a street address in the industrial district. Now mostly abandoned warehouses and discount clinics. Something about it felt heavy, unfinished, like a door waiting to be pushed open. Miles lay curled on an old blanket at her feet, his eyes following her without moving his head. His leg was still swollen, though Dr. Lark had provided medication and a loose wrap. But more than the injuries, it was his silence that haunted her. The kind of silence that didn't just come from pain, but from betrayal. Emma opened her laptop and began to search. Marcia Dent was hard to find. No social media, no listed phone number. Emma only found a single result, a staff listing from 3 years ago on the Glow Royale corporate site. Executive assistant to Ms. Charlotte Wallace. She called the number associated with the building, disconnected. She drove to the address. A peeling green door marked Unit 3C buzzed once, then clicked open. A woman in her late 40s answered, thinner than her photo, nervous eyes. I don't talk about her, Marcia said flatly. Emma held up her phone. I'm not here for trouble, just truth. I pulled a pit bull from the river. He had a chip. His name is Apollo. Marcia's hand went to her mouth. Her body sagged against the doorframe. She told me she gave him to a shelter, she whispered. She threw him into a river. Marcia hesitated, then stepped aside. Come in. Inside, the apartment was small and dim. A sewing machine sat near the window. On the wall, a photo of Marcia in a corporate blazer with Charlotte, smiling, arms locked. She changes when the cameras go off, Marcia said, pouring lukewarm tea. Everything's about the brand. The woman loves cruelty more than champagne. Did she ever hurt the dog? Emma asked. Marcia went quiet, then stood, walked to a drawer, and pulled out a small flash drive. She thought I deleted the security footage. I didn't. I couldn't. Emma watched the video on Marcia's laptop. There, grainy and time-stamped, was Charlotte, screaming at the dog, hitting him with a rolled magazine, yanking his collar so hard he fell sideways. It ended with her locking Apollo in a dark room. Emma leaned back, hands shaking. Will you let me use this? She asked. Marcia nodded. Only if you promise not to stop halfway. Driving home, Emma felt her chest tighten. The memory of Judge Benson's gavel slamming down. Case dismissed. That was 2 years ago. She had tried to save another dog back then, lost the case, got sued for defamation, spent months drowning in shame. That night she stared at the footage again, then at Miles, his ribs rising and falling slow and steady beside the couch. Don't stop halfway, she whispered to herself. Emma sent the footage anonymously to a local animal rights group's tip line. She also posted a blurred still from the video on her personal blog, writing, "What happens when cruelty hides behind lip gloss and good lighting?" The blog gained traction overnight. Comments, emails, some in support, others warning her to back off. Then a letter arrived. No stamp, just slipped under her door. A cease and desist from Glow Royale's legal team. Larry read the document in her kitchen and grunted. She's nervous. Good. Emma clenched her fists. Then we're not stopping. They planned a public meetup at the town park. Emma would bring the footage, Miles, and speak to any local press who'd listen. A former dog handler from the K-9 unit offered to show up for support. But on the morning of the event, Emma's door was ajar when she came back from her run, and Miles was gone. She screamed his name through the street, ran to every neighbor's yard, called the vet. Nothing. She collapsed in her driveway, breath ragged, the air too hot, the guilt too thick. Larry arrived 20 minutes later. They took him, she said. He nodded grimly. Let's find out where. He tapped the collar in his hand. They didn't know we upgraded his chip with GPS. Emma's eyes widened. You did that? I've seen this game before, he muttered, and I never play it blind. He pulled up a blinking dot on his phone. Warehouse District, near the edge of town. Emma grabbed her coat. I'm going with you, she said. End of Act 2. Emma's mission escalates from silent witness to active resistor. Now it's personal. Now they've taken something she loves, and she's ready to take it back. The drive toward the warehouse district felt longer than it was. Rain tapped the windshield in cold, steady patterns. Emma sat quietly in the passenger seat of Larry's truck, gripping a flashlight and watching the GPS signal on his phone. A small blinking dot that had stopped moving. I should have protected him, she whispered. You did, Larry said, and now we finish the job. They pulled into a cracked, weed-covered lot behind an old fertilizer plant. One dim light glowed behind a sheet metal wall. A black SUV sat parked near the entrance. Emma knew that car. It was Charlotte's. Inside, the warehouse smelled of rust and mildew. Their footsteps echoed off the concrete. In the far corner, under a flickering bulb, a metal crate sat alone. And inside it, Miles curled up, trembling. Emma ran ahead. Miles, she gasped, falling to her knees. The dog whimpered, ears back, his tail tapping weakly. She reached for the latch. Touch him, and I'll add trespassing to your list, a voice said behind her. Charlotte Wallace stepped forward, arms folded, no makeup this time, just fury. Emma stood. You don't get to do this anymore. He's mine, Charlotte hissed. Number. He's a soul you betrayed, Emma said. Charlotte stepped closer. You want a medal? A sob story on the news? Larry raised his phone. Number just the truth. And we've got it recorded. Charlotte froze. That's illegal. Not when you're threatening someone, Larry replied, and not when you admit everything. She stared at Emma, bitter and confused. You won't win. Emma's voice was steady. You already lost. 10 minutes later, the police arrived. Emma handed over Marcia's video. Larry gave them the recording. The officers recognized Charlotte, but this time the evidence was undeniable. She was read her rights. She didn't resist. As they cuffed her, Charlotte looked at Emma and spat. He's just a dog. Emma looked down at Miles. No, she said. He's proof you don't always get away with it. Weeks passed. Charlotte's arrest made news for a day before it disappeared into PR spin. But the people remembered, especially the ones who had stayed quiet for too long. Emma didn't go back to her old job. She and Larry opened The Haven, a healing space for animals and people alike. Miles recovered. He became the center's soul, especially gentle with veterans and children who'd seen too much. One spring morning, a statue was unveiled in Maple Creek Park. A bronze pit bull stood tall, one paw lifted gently. The plaque beneath read, "Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it limps, and still finds its way." Emma stood beside it with Miles at her side, his scar still faint on one leg, his eyes brighter than ever. She hadn't planned to become a symbol. She had only done what needed to be done. And now she knew one thing for sure. She would never look away again. 2 months after Charlotte Wallace's arrest, the town of Fairgrove quietly returned to its routines, but nothing was the same. Glow Royale released a public statement calling it a deeply unfortunate personal incident, followed by a strategic donation and a brief rehab stay. But the footage and the audio had already settled into public consciousness, and the statue at Maple Creek Park wasn't going anywhere. People began to trickle into the haven, not just adopters or donors, but ordinary folks carrying invisible weight. A retired schoolteacher who had watched a neighbor chain a dog to a post for 5 years without speaking. A teenager who filmed her uncle striking a cat but never showed anyone. A father who once told his son to ignore the dog crying next door. Emma watched them arrive in silence, and Miles would quietly greet them. He didn't bark, he didn't jump. He simply leaned gently into their legs, waited, and let them breathe. At night, Emma sat with the stack of letters that had arrived since her blog post, handwritten, folded with care. Each one a quiet confession, a ripple from the moment she jumped into the river. "You didn't just save him. You gave me permission to care," one read. Another, "I spoke up." They listened. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Emma would lay her hand on Miles's head and whisper, "You did that." He'd blink once, rest his chin on her foot. No words needed. Larry showed up one morning with a manila envelope and a worn-out badge. "Retired, not expired," he said, handing her both. Inside the envelope were lobbying records, internal shelter memos, and donation trails that proved Charlotte's cruelty had never been isolated. It had been protected, paid for, ignored. "She didn't just hurt dogs," Larry said. "She built a system to keep them silent, and people too." Emma looked at the papers, then at Larry. "Then we keep going," she said. The haven evolved. It wasn't just a rescue anymore. It was a voice. They hosted community classes on trauma-informed pet care, taught people how to intervene safely, offered workshops on healing through presence. No words, just time and stillness. Miles often lay beneath the oak tree, where children now gathered to draw or read out loud. One child, a boy named Felix who hadn't spoken in months, whispered to Miles after petting his side, "You're not broken, just brave." Emma turned away before her tears could fall. 1 year after the incident, the town council renamed Maple Creek Bridge. No ribbon cutting, no press release, just a new wooden sign. Miles Bridge, for those who still trust. Beneath it, in smaller letters, for the ones who never looked away. Emma stood on that bridge the next morning with Miles beside her. The air was cool, the water calm. And in the stillness, she knew that this wasn't just the end of something. It was the beginning of something better. Not perfect, not loud, but steady. And that was enough. The letters kept coming, folded by hand, stamped with care, addressed simply to the haven. Emma read them every morning before opening the gates. A retired nurse from Kansas wrote, "I finally called the sheriff. He came. They found 5 dogs in chains." A teenager in Louisiana wrote, "I saw a dog get kicked. I filmed it. I showed it. They took him to safety." A single line from a letter in Montana read, "You made me speak." "Thank you." Emma read each one aloud to Miles. He didn't understand the words, but he always nudged her elbow when she paused too long. They weren't just letters, they were echoes. Proof that something small had cracked open something big. One morning, Larry brought her a manila envelope. Inside were documents, shelter memos, donation trails, anonymous tips, all pointing back to Charlotte Wallace. "She didn't act alone," Larry said. "She had a whole system protecting her. She paid off shelters, silenced whistleblowers, bribed officials." Emma's hands trembled as she read the names. One was Rick Dalton, the same man who told her months ago that nothing could be done. She looked at Larry. "She buried it all," he nodded. "And we're not done digging." The rage Emma felt wasn't loud. It was cold and clear. She scanned the documents again. "Then we bring it all to the surface." The Haven became more than a shelter. It became a movement. Reporters visited. A documentary crew from Portland came to film. They interviewed Emma, Larry, Dr. Lark, and even Marcia Dent, now ready to speak on record. The footage of Miles limping from the crate and leaning into Emma's arms became a national symbol. They called the short film "The Quiet Case That Barked Back." And in small towns across the country, whispers turned into questions. Old reports were reopened. One man in Arizona emailed to say, "I watched the film. Then I walked into the sheriff's office with evidence. They're investigating now." At the Haven, Miles thrived. He didn't need training. He didn't wear a vest. He just existed. Solid, calm, unwavering. Veterans sat beside him without speaking. Children who flinched at loud noises stroked his ears and giggled. One little girl traced the scar on his leg with her finger and whispered, "You didn't quit." "I won't either." Emma stood in the hallway, hand over her mouth, watching the healing happen in real time. At the next town hall, new regulations passed. Anonymous abuse hotlines, stricter inspection protocols, and mandatory response guidelines for all shelters. The mayor didn't smile for cameras. No reporters attended. But it didn't matter. The vote passed. People clapped. Quietly. Purposefully. Larry leaned toward Emma and said, "This isn't loud. But it's law now." She nodded, heart full. Someone in the back asked Emma to speak. She stepped up slowly, took a breath, and said, "I'm not here because I'm brave. I'm here because I couldn't stay silent anymore. Sometimes all justice needs is someone who doesn't walk away." There was no thunderous applause, just steady nods, a few tears, and a room that knew silence was no longer an option. The chain had been broken, and the echo of it was still spreading. 1 year later, on a crisp autumn morning, Emma stood once more on Maple Creek Bridge, the place where everything began. The water below flowed calmly, sunlight skipping across its surface. She held a small bundle of white daisies in her hand, simple and honest. Beside her, Miles stood tall, his eyes clear, his gait strong, his scar faded, but never forgotten. She leaned over the railing and let the flowers drop gently into the current. "For the ones we couldn't save," she whispered, "and for the ones still waiting." The Haven had grown in ways she hadn't planned. What started as a quiet rescue center had become a living network, teams of volunteers, therapy animals, mobile education units, and partnerships with clinics and counselors across the county. People came from out of state now, not just to adopt, but to listen, to speak, to heal. Miles had become more than a symbol. He was a presence. He didn't perform or pose. He simply showed up. Children read stories to him beneath the oak tree. Survivors sat beside him in silence. Veterans taught him to nudge their palms during flashbacks. He just knew. And Emma no longer questioned how. One evening, sitting on the back porch of the Haven, Emma and Larry watched the last of the sun sink behind the trees. He sipped coffee. She cradled tea. "I never thought I'd get to fix something this late in life," he said. Emma smiled. "You didn't fix something. You built something that can't be broken again." Larry handed her an old badge from his early years on the force. "I kept this because I thought one day I might need to believe in it again. Turns out I needed to believe in you." Emma pressed it to her chest and said nothing. No thanks were necessary. He already knew. That night, Emma opened her laptop and typed her final blog entry. "We want justice to roar. We want it to slam doors, rattle windows, shake the ground. But sometimes justice is quieter. Sometimes it limps home and lays its head in your lap. Sometimes it watches and waits and doesn't leave. I thought I had to feet loud to make change. But all I had to do was not look away." She signed the post with 2 words: "Still here." Months later, the town council passed a motion with no ceremony, no press, just sincerity. Maple Creek Bridge was renamed. The new sign read, "Miles Bridge, for those who still trust." And beneath it, in smaller lettering, "In honor of the quiet ones who never looked away." Emma crossed the bridge with Miles at her side, the same way they had walked hundreds of times, but this time slower, with reverence, with peace. The past was still there, but it no longer owned her. Miles looked up at her, tail swinging gently. She knelt beside him, placed a hand on his neck, and whispered, "We're okay now." He blinked once. They kept walking, and behind them the wind lifted the daisies across the water, small, steady, never forgotten,